Mitosis is a highly regulated process that is driven by specific signaling molecules that are present in the cytoplasm. And these signaling molecules make up the cell's control system. And the cell cycle is controlled at certain checkpoints. So here, let's just redraw our cell cycle. So we have mitosis, G1 of interphase, the S, and G2. So there's 3 checkpoints. The G1 checkpoint, the M checkpoint, and the G2 check. And at each of these control points, there's stop and go signals from these signaling molecules in the cytoplasm that regulate the cell cycle. Now, these regulatory molecules are called kinases, and they are what drive the cell cycle. Most of the time, they are inactive until they attach to a cyclin. So let's say here's our kinase, here's our cyclin, and because they're inactive until they attach to the cyclin, we call them cyclit-dependent kinases, or CDK. Here's our cyclin. Okay. One important CDK is maturation promoting factor, or MPF. And when we have enough of the components that make up MPF, so enough of the cyclins in the CDK, we pass the G2 checkpoint. So here, kind of in the S, we got our CDKs, we got our cyclin. So once we have enough of these, they pass the G2 checkpoint and MPF is formed. So here is our MPF. And MPF is what triggers the start of mitosis. So once the MPF's activity peaks during anaphase and metaphase, and there are no more chromosomes that are going to attach to the spindle fibers, the microtubules, then we pass the M checkpoint. Once we pass the M checkpoint, so we have our MPF, the cyclin component of our entity begins to degrade. And we go through our G1 checkpoint. The CDK is being recycled. Once all the CDK is recycled and all the cyclin has broken down, we pass the G1 checkpoint and we go back into the G2 phase. So here, this is when we have our CDK accumulate, it interacts with the cyclins, and we begin this cycle again. Unless we don't get a go-ahead signal from a growth promoting factor. And that's another one of these kinases that controls the cycle and allows it to go past the G1 checkpoint. If we don't get the go-ahead signal that allows us to pass the G1 checkpoint, then the cell exits the cell cycle and goes to the G0 phase, which is a state of non-division. Based on these, we can see how all these regulatory molecules are what keeps the cell cycle in check, because it's all based on their presence. And again, MPF is just one of many. Another type of these type of molecules is called PDGF. And it's made from blood cell fragments, so like blood cells, you know, little platelets and platelets. And when it bonds to receptors on fibroblasts, which are a component of muscle tissue, it allows the cell to pass the G1 checkpoint and divide. And so that is essentially how wounds are healed, because more fibroblasts are created, more muscle tissue. What happens when the cell cycle is disrupted or these signals are ignored? That is cancer. So cancer can have a variety of causes. It can be caused by an abnormality in the signal pathway for growth factors. So even when there isn't any actual growth factors, the cycle will signal that there is, and the cells will continue to reproduce endlessly. Another cause is when they don't, because growth factors, the growth factor we saw, like PDGF, is an externally produced signaling molecule. Like it comes from blood fragments. The NPF is an internally produced one. You know, it comes from the inside the cell cycle. So when the cell starts producing its own growth factors that signal the go-ahead signal for it to keep reproducing, that also causes cancer. So they make their own growth factor. Or if the cell has mutated DNA that's just resulted in a bad cell control system with bad cell cycle controls, this can lead to cancer. And now the accumulation of all these extra cells, sometimes they can stay in the same place. So they just they form a big mass. These are called tumors. They can just stay in the same place. And these are benign tumors. Or these cells can begin to spread to move to other parts of the bodies. So we have all these, so just pretend there's a lot of cells in here. So we have all these cells. They begin to spread to other parts of the bodies, a metastatic tumor. And then, so the cancer cells from the original location spread to other organs, and they mess up their cell growth factors.